Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Municipal Administrator Training session. And I understand there was a bit of a mix-up in terms of the link for the meeting, so we may have some folks joining us as we get underway here. But I think we'll get going. We've got just over 100 joined in so far, and we've got about an hour and a bit worth of presentation, and we wanted to get underway. So I think we'll get going. And with that, introduce myself. My name is Sean Cooney. I'm Managing Director of Technical Standards and Policy Division, and I am joined by my colleague, Kevin Grote, Assistant Managing Director of Assessment Services Division. Kevin saying hi there. So we'll be the two giving you today's session like we did last year. And we've got a few rules of the road, and then I'll talk about the various sections Kevin and I are going to address, and we'll go from there. So this is a Zoom meeting. And so everyone's going to be muted just so we can carry on with the presentations. But we are going to have a question and answers session at the end, and we'd be glad to answer any questions at that time. And you can use the Q&A functionality or the raise hand feature in Zoom, and hopefully most people are familiar with Zoom now. We have a chat feature, so if you're having technical support problems, you can use the chat function. And you can also email support@webinarsolutions.ca if you get stuck. This meeting is being facilitated. So with that, you should be able to get back on track if you're having any technical difficulties. So last year, Kevin and I talked about some general concepts around mass appraisal in Saskatchewan, and we looked at MySAMA, did a demo of that, and then we looked at SamaView, so brand new applications that SAMA was using. For this year, we thought we would address something very topical, and that's the revaluation, the 2021 reval. And we came up with a theme for this, which is the basics and common questions. So we're going to break it into 4 pieces, today's presentation. We're going to talk about why we conduct a revaluation. And this, of course, you're going to get questions in your municipal offices. What's this all about and why do we need it? So we'll talk about some of the basics around that. How do we prepare for a revaluation? We're in SAMA valuing over 800,000 properties. How the heck do we do that? And what are some of the approaches to getting that done? We're going to talk about the outcome of the revaluation. So I'm going to give you an idea of what actually happened at a provincial level with assessments for this revaluation and what the changes are, because that has implications across the province. And Kevin is going to end up talking about the next steps for the revaluation. You're getting your assessment rules posted, the 21 assessments are coming in, and what are some of the next steps that we can expect. One other added feature this year is we're going to have a bit of a quiz. We're going to keep you on your toes today, let's just say that. So we have got 10 skill testing questions nested in the various presentation parts. And it gives you a chance to kind of put into use some of the new knowledge that you've got, and we're going to vote. So the group will pick their favorite answer, the best answer, and we'll see how we did at the end. So that hopefully will make it a little more interesting. I'll just say that the questions are not exactly gimmies in all cases. There's some tricky stuff here. So it hopefully it'll be fun and make it a little bit more engaging. And that you'll see at the very end, we've got Corrine marking it. And maybe we'll see if you want as a group, we'll see how we did and maybe how Kevin and I did in presenting and explaining a lot of this material. So I'm going to start off with why do we conduct a revaluation? And this picture to me of the scales kind of has implications of fairness and equity. And I think at the heart of a revaluation, that's what is happening here. Values change over time, and so we need to update those values to be fair because assessments are used to apportion property taxes. And if you want to know that you're being treated fairly, you want to make sure that you have a reasonable value on your property subject to the rules. So we'll talk about some of that. Why do we do a revaluation? Well, let's start with legislation. It is a requirement, it is the law. We have to revalue properties. And there's a definition right in the Assessment Management Agency Act. And it basically says a revaluation is taking all the property that's in your municipalities, that's in the province, and assigning a new level of value. That new level of value is as of a base date. and we're taking into considerations the new assessment manual or our cost guides, materials that we use in doing our valuations, and also any changes in legislation need to be considered as well. So it's an opportunity to kind of reset the line to update values at a single point in time. How often do we do this? Again, we turn to legislation. We have to do this every 4 years. Um, and that period of time was chosen as a reasonable length of time in which to say, okay, we want to make values a little bit more current. Let's update them again. You'll see different cycles going across Canada. Some do it annually, some do it every 2, 3, 4 years. Ontario does it every 4 years like us, and it's just a decision that's made for a jurisdiction or a province, and we're on a 4-year cycle. The other thing to note is every municipality is to be revalued under the direction and supervision of the agency once every 4 years. So that includes the independent cities that provide their own assessment services, Saskatoon, Regina, Prince Albert, and Swift Current. They're revaluing their property at the same time as SAMA, getting their new rules in place. In terms of the basics, you know that we need a revaluation. It's law. We need to do it every 4 years, but what are the values? Are they values as of a week ago, a month ago, 2 years ago? They're as of a base date, and the base date is set out in legislation and explains that all the values shall be directed to that point in time. So we adjust our models. We look at costs as of the base date. We time adjust our sale prices, and we build our valuation models to reflect the base date. The base date for this revaluation is January 1st, 2019, and that is bringing our values forward from the previous base date from 4 years ago. The other concept to bear in mind is something we call the base date lag. That's the period between when a base date occurs and a revaluation implementation occurs. Currently, it's 24 months. And in legislation, it can vary from 1 year up to 3 years. So we're right in the middle there with 24 months. It used to be a little bit longer. I think it was 30 months. And a decision was made that assessment service providers would do their work a little bit sooner, like in more confined period. And also government would do its tax policy modeling in a shorter time frame. Instead of taking a year, they only start April 1st and have to have the policies together for the whole province. So that's some of the background on it. And that kind of, we can summarize it. Just give me a sec here. Kind of summarize it on the 4-year cycle. So I've highlighted the current cycle that we're in, January 1st, 2019, for the 4-year period assessment rules for the 2021 to 2024. We came out of the 2015 base date, so we're updating values by 4 years. The next base date, if all things being equal, would be January 1st, 2023, and that would be in place for the 2025 to 2028 assessment roll years. So we're updating every 4 years. We've got a base date that we're gearing towards. We're trying to keep values fairly current by doing these updates and looking at new sales and costs when we value regulated property and so forth. The other important thing to point out is the dominant and controlling factor in the assessment of property is equity. So that gets back to the concept of fairness and equity. The mass appraisal system that we use is based on ad valorem, and that is a concept meaning according to value. And overall, assessors, assessment appraisers are trying to achieve a one-to-one relationship between property values and property assessments. And that's where the fairness comes in. That will be at the very highest level. That is our goal, and it carries through as we do our valuations at various levels. And that is the main reason we're doing a revaluation, is to keep things fair. The other important thing to know is you've got legislation. It tells you have to do a reval every 4 years according to a base date. And we know it has to be based on equity. That's the dominant and controlling factor. But there's a few other pieces to this puzzle. Every revaluation, you should know there's some orders. And these orders are determined by SAMA in consultation with stakeholders, of course, and approved by our board of directors, and ultimately approved by the Minister of Government Relations. So these 4 key pieces of I guess, rules could call them, help set the framework, the rest of the framework that isn't in legislation. The first one is the base date. So we have an order for 2021 reval that sets January 1st, 2019 as our base date. We have a market value evidence order. Now, this is an important one as an administrator when you have folks coming in and saying, my property just sold last week and it's nowhere near my assessment. Well, we're using all of the market data up to the base date. So everything that occurred or arose after January 1st, 2019 is not included in our models. We can't. The reason for that is we're building mass appraisal models using all of the sales in a municipality in the province to build our models. And it would be a moving target if every month we had to add in a new group of sales and a new group of sales. So we work with all the data that's available to us to make a fair model. We're trying to reflect the base date, so we're using the sales up to the base date. And then anything that occurs after that gets used for the next revaluation. So there's fairness in that. Those sales don't get disregarded. They'll factor in for the next revaluation. We have a quality assurance standard order, and again, speaking to that equity piece, this is the high-level relationship between assessments and sale prices. We're always striving for a ratio of 1, so a 1-to-1 overall average relationship between assessments and sale prices. But this standard says it can be from 0.95 to 1.05, and that's just because sales really vary. Depending on locations, you can have fewer sales, and it can be more difficult to achieve that. But what it does is before a role is confirmed, we publish the quality assurance standards, that level of value for all residential and all other property valued on the market valuation standard, including land and improvements, to our website, to SAMA's website. And so you can go in to SAMA's website and you can look at what the quality assurance standards are for 2021 for your municipality once they're posted. And you can look at both of them. The other thing we're doing is we're actually publishing the detailed files. So all of the sales that went into the market analysis will be available on the website, all of the observations that went into that standard. Lastly, we have an order to give force of law to our regulated manual that we use to value regulated property for the 2019 base year. So that is a fourth order. And if you want to look at them, or if you have anyone coming into your office is saying, I don't understand this market value evidence, that order is right on our website. And I have a little snippet here from our website that you can refer to. All righty. So we've got one of the last concepts to think about is the market valuation standard. So we have regulated property and we have market value property, properties that sell that we can value using sales and income information. So firstly, regulated property, railway and pipeline, linear property, resource production equipment for oil and gas and mine, and heavy industrial property and agricultural land. Those are all properties that don't that are valued using a regulated manual, using costs or mass appraisal models that lend themselves to regulation. And by and large, these are properties that don't typically sell. We don't have a lot of pipeline sales or railway sales or heavy industrial sales. So they're best valued on the cost approach to value. The exception is agricultural land, which is based on productivity and a productivity model. And that's been in place for some time. Everything else falls under the market valuation standard. And if you want to look at the formal definition, it's achieved by applying the standards so assessments bear a fair and just proportion to similar property as of the base date. So there you go, you've got the base date concept there again. And the real important thing of this is a fair and just proportion to the value of similar properties. So we're using a couple ways to do that. The market valuation standard has some very specific requirements. We have to use mass appraisal. And this is an important one because a lot of people do not understand that's a lot different than you getting an appraisal on your property. It estimates the full bundle of rights, the full ownership that you have in a property. And so that's a consideration. Typical market conditions for similar properties. So homes could sell in a certain area from $200,000 to $275,000. That's a range, and we're modeling that range versus trying to find out the value of each and every individual property. And we do that by stratifying our sales when we look at them. And lastly, they have to meet quality assurance standards established by order of the agency, and that's We just spoke of that, and that's that high level ratio that we need to achieve. The last two things I think as an administrator that would be very, very helpful to keep in mind as you're getting questioned about assessments is we're using mass appraisal and standard methods, common data, and statistical testing as the base date. Really what that means is, unlike an appraiser who would go out and value one property, and he'd say, what are my three best comparables, and adjust those sales towards that one property and come up with an estimate for, say, your property if you commissioned the appraisal. That is a completely different assignment than mass appraisers. We're looking at every sale. We have to value the 800,000 plus properties in our client municipalities, and we can only do that using standardized methods and models, common data, bringing together all the sales and using techniques to model, like multiple regression analysis, which is a statistical tool to help look at all the variables, relate that to sale price, and come up with a valuation model. We do have to work at a value that achieves market value, but it's in the context of mass appraisal. But when we look at our sales, we want to look at valid arm's length sales. So that would be a sale that occurs in an open market between a willing buyer and a willing seller. And they have to be knowledgeable when they enter into this transaction and not be pressured. So undue influence is something we'd be watching for. So foreclosure, a bank sale, a distress sale, related purchasers and vendors, those are the types of sales that would be screened out, because we want, as the definition explains, we want a sale price that is in open market and a good indication of the market value of property. So just to recap, you put together what's in legislation, you look at some of the principles of what we're doing, you look at the orders, you can really boil it down to a few fundamentals. Property values change over time. Revaluations are meant to update those changes to create a new fair standard for assessment and ultimately for taxation, and dividing up the tax pie. Fairness and equity, by knowing that your property's assessed equitably with your neighbors if he's got a similar house, that gives you that peace of mind that you're being treated fairly. And mass appraisals are based on a base date, so a retrospective value. They're not a current value, they're not current market value, they are retrospective or going back in time. So I'm going to end off with just a couple common questions that you might get. You've probably heard this if you're an experienced administrator. If you're new, maybe this is something you'll have on the 2021 reval as people come in and ask about their assessments. My assessment should sell for what I recently bought my property for. And it might, that would be nice if it did, but you got to remember, a single sale is not the market. And we're not looking at one single sale to decide what an assessment should be. We're looking at the entire market, and that's our job. We're looking at all arm's length sales, and we're using a valuation model. So it's going to be a little different than a fee appraiser looking at one property valuation. We stratify our properties. So we're looking at similar properties and we group them. We use a process called stratification. So they're similar when we go to build that model, and that achieves the market valuation standard. The other thing to point out again is that market value evidence order. So sales that occurred or arose after January 1, 2019, we can't use that in our analysis. So you might have a sale that someone comes and waves and says, hey, this is what I should be assessed at. No, everyone is treated fairly as of the base date, and that's the consideration. So there might be some things to think about for that question. Another one is, I just had my property appraised, indicates my assessment is too high, and we spoke about this a bit. Appraisers are using a few sales to value a single property. Mass appraisers are using every single sale. Mass appraisals are a requirement in legislation. We would love to say, gee, give us your fee appraisal and we'll put that on your assessment, but that's not how it works. That's not the law. And we're using a different set of models than that fee appraiser, so we're going to get different results potentially. It doesn't mean the assessment is wrong, because there's a range of values out there and we're modeling it with all the data. And the thing to remember too is assessments are retrospective. So if somebody comes in with an appraisal that was done a year ago or 6 weeks ago, that could be quite different than the base date of January 1, 2019. All right. The last one is my 21 assessment decrease, so my taxes should be going down. Sounds logical, right? We hear that a lot, and you would hear it more because we handle the assessment side of the equation. Local administrators deal with property taxes. And of course, the answer is mass appraisal-based assessments are just the first step in determining individual property taxes. There's a lot more that goes into it. Of course, there's provincial tax policy, percentages of value. There's various local tax tools that are applied, and local mill rates, of course. So it all depends on the location that you're in. Assessment is only one consideration in the property tax formula. If a municipality needs additional funding in a revaluation year, your assessment may go down, but your taxes might go up. So it's a little simplistic to say my assessment decreased and my taxes should go down. Alrighty, so that takes us to the end of the first section. And I think we're going to be having a little bit of a quiz like we promised you. And we're going to have our facilitator bring up the questions if possible. And I'll speak to each of those. All right, get ready. This is going to be interesting. Okay, which of the following is not true? An assessment revaluation is a requirement of legislation, updates assessments to current market values, occurs once every 4 years, or occurs under the direct supervision of the agency, direction and supervision of the agency. So you should be able to vote, and if you can vote, indicate which is your top pick in terms of what is not true about a revaluation. And you've got the 4 choices there. So I'm not sure if we show the results right now or if we hold off to the end. Ah, there we go. Oh my goodness, you guys are right on the money. You've got the right answer there. Assessments do not equal current market values. They're as of a base date. So really good job, good answers. All right, we've got another question coming up here. Okay, now this is a little bit of a trick question. A sale that occurred or arose on January 1st, 2019 can be used in the market analysis for the 2021 revaluation. Is that true or is that false? It's a little bit of a technical question, has to do with how the market value evidence cutoff order is worded. But I gave you a couple clues during the first presentation there. So we'll wait for the final results on that one. Wow, I think I tricked a lot of people there. It's true. A sale that occurred or arose on January 1st can be used. A sale that occurred or arose after the base date, after Jan 1, 2019, cannot be used. So it's a little bit of a, that wasn't a real fair one. Sorry about that one. See, a lot of people still got that one right though. Alrighty, we've got a couple more questions to close off this session. The base date lag. Alrighty. The base date lag is the period between the base date and the date of the market value evidence order. It is the period between the base date and the revaluation. It's currently set at 30 months. It's currently set at 20 months. And it says A and C, but that should be the first option and option number 3. So period between the base date, market value evidence order, and 30 months. So only one of those is true. And the survey says, yep, you guys picked the right answer. It's the period between the base date and the revaluation. 63% got that right, so good job. It is 24 months. And the final question, which is a requirement of the market valuation standard. It is needed to determine regulated property assessments. It requires adequate sales and market data after the base date. It's prepared using mass appraisal. It is determined using SAMA's regulated assessment manual. I think there might be a mistake in the question. Maybe it got transcribed. Let me just, before you vote, just 1 second here. Let me just check this one out. Yep, no, it's good. So which is a requirement of the market valuation standard? And there is only one correct answer for this. Takes a while to get all the votes in. Here we go. Prepared using mass appraisal. Yes, absolutely. So the majority got that one right. Good job, you guys. I think that was 3 out of 4 right. So I'm going to turn it over to Kevin. Go ahead, Kevin.
Thanks, Sean. Just hold on one second here while I get everything all combobulated. So welcome again, and thank you for taking time to attend our training session. You know, when we talked about what to present, and we thought, well, what are some of the things that you might not realize regarding a revaluation? And if you look at the slide there, and hopefully you can read the words. It says caution, expected worst conditions the next 60 kilometers. And that's just a sign just outside of Canmore, Alberta. And if we were in person, I would ask if anyone had ever been on that road. But my wife and I, one thing we love to do when we're doing any kind of vacation is not really having any plans, but we just drive around and see what we can see. And the road that followed that sign did have a lot of beautiful views, but it just required that you keep your focus on what on the road as well, and only do the viewing part when you were stopped. And for me, really, what the sign was trying to convey was that, you know, road conditions change quickly, and if you're not paying attention, you could be surprised. And maybe you felt surprised after you got your revaluation results, either this one or another one. And hopefully today's presentation will give you a little bit of insight of what occurs in the background for each revaluation. But before I get on with that part of the presentation, it's interesting. I do notice that, you know, as administrators, you're probably a group of people that really want to share the excitement, because what I have noticed as a trend in the last couple of revals is internally on our own webpage, we keep notices of anytime there's an administrator changing positions. And with each reval, usually January, February, all of a sudden we see a whole bunch of new administrators come through that we have to get to know. So it's great that you're willing to share the excitement. So the primary responsibility for the revaluation, each revaluation, is done in the regional office for the clients we serve. And for most municipalities, the models are developed within the region. In addition, we have a group called the Revaluation Unit, which serves as a support unit for specialists that handle some of the more complex models in a revaluation. As well as leading up to the revaluation, they'll offer training to the appraisers in the regions who are developing the models. And the purpose of the training is to highlight any appeal decisions that have occurred that might affect the way we built the models. And for experienced appraisers, it'll be a refresher on the software used to do the analysis. And for new members, the training is more involved and involves guided analysis, just to get the appraisers used to looking at sales and how we build their models. For the income analysis and other models that have more of a province-wide market, we actually have that analysis done within the revaluation unit. Of course, we'll have regional appraisers or regional senior market commercial appraisers involved with it to get the local knowledge in, but we have more of the technical expertise within our revaluation unit. And also the other thing that the reval unit does is there's a quality control measure involved. in that we'll take and make sure we're reviewing samples of analysis that are being done to make sure they're following the methods that we've outlined in the training. But actually, the revaluation unit itself is probably more aptly be named as a support unit, because revaluation is only one part of their tasks. They provide assistance and training like every year, and so in non-reval years, it's more so doing supportive value work. And in fact, like with the increase that we saw in this last base cycle's appeals being launched, and especially appeals taken to the SMB and to the Court of Appeal, we took and we converted one of our positions that we had within the reval unit and focused it on looking at the appeal decisions and providing training based on those decisions, as well as having them incorporate the decisions into the way we model. And as well, the revaluation unit does take, and when we're coming up to different types of models and trying to determine how best to model something, we'll actually take and look across North America and actually internationally and see, has anyone else come across this problem? Because there's no sense in us just reinventing the wheel for our purposes. So, and I think actually we should have a question on this this particular side. So Cassian, if you want to put that up. Would have been great to have that question up while I was figuring out my audio. Oh, split decision almost, but yes, it is false. The revaluation unit doesn't do all the models for the entire province. The majority of the models are developed in the regional offices, just with oversight. So. And if you attended last year's presentation, you would have seen the same slide here. And as I said, if I asked my son what's a common thing among these three tools, he would answer they can all be used to hammer, which might also explain why I've currently got his car in my shop for some repairs right now. But actually, if it's true, you could use them to hammer, but I prefer that you wouldn't. But they're all designed for they're all types of wrenches, and they each have an advantage in a certain situation. And this is like when, as appraisers, you'll hear us talk about three approaches to value, and those three approaches are like three tools in a toolbox. They get to the same end. In this case, either loosening or tightening a nut, but each approach it in a different way, and each has a strength in certain situations. So to begin with, the most commonly applied approach in in valuation in our province is the cost approach, and that breaks apart the land value and the building value. And thinking back to the wrenches there, it's like the big crescent wrench. It's adaptable, it's simple to use, and it's the old standby. Now, when we start looking at the the land valuation for market value properties, market value standard, pardon me. These ones we take and we look at what are the attributes like size and location and servicing, determine what affects the value. And we're simply comparing, and it's using the sales comparison method essentially, where we're taking and looking at sold properties and determining what's the best way of valuing the unsold properties. For the improvements, so for residential and commercial buildings, we first determine a replacement cost, new, less depreciation, and that's determined using our cost guides. And then we take that amount of what we estimate the cost of construction to be and compare it to the selling price of the improved property, taking off the land value. And then what you have is a ratio of how much of that building cost is recaptured. And there was a number of revals in the province where it was always cents on the dollar, like you'd only recapture a certain percentage. And then we went through times of where we were recapturing more than the depreciated costs. So once we have that ratio, we take the median one, and that median ratio is actually what we call the market adjustment factor, or MAF or MAF. In the end, we take those estimates of the land values and the building value, and we combine them to give an estimate of the property value. And I think we have the next poll question ready there. Not quite as exciting as watching the election results, but correct. It's the sales comparison approach. And this one's a little bit of a trick question, because for the land value used in the cost approach, yeah, we are. It's a method of under the sales comparison approach that we use to determine the land values. And no, we don't use the actual realtor listings. So next approach, sales comparison approach, it requires a lot of sales to calibrate if we're using the method of multiple regression analysis, and that's a way of building an entire model, not just for land, but also the improved property values. And in doing that, it's kind of like that electric impact wrench. It's very good at specific jobs. It's very quick, but it has its limitations. And the limitations for building building values out of it are you need a lot of sales to calibrate it. And essentially what multiple regression analysis is, if you've ever heard or seen anything on the news, or when they're talking about analytics and they're watching certain customer behaviors or anything like that, they'll be using regression analysis to say, what's occurring and what are all the what other related pieces of information can we use to predict what occurs. So for a building model, what we'll look to is we'll take, and I think it's like there's 5 attributes that typically describe 85% of sale price. You know, the year, how old the property is, the location, the size of the land, size of the building, and number of bedrooms. So those, all our software does is it takes and very quickly looks for how strongly correlated are each one of those variables or any variable you put in, and how can it determine what factors to assign to each of those variables. And like I said, bottom line is it's just trying to mimic what goes on in the minds of most buyers when we're purchasing a property. Now, I have a few slides on this one, and I just put it out there because not sure who all's in attendance here, but there's certain properties across the province that are done on the income approach. And when we'll clarify it to say rental income, because it's not an individual's income that they would show on their tax return, but it's the building's rental income. And so when you think of, you know, if there's buildings that typically generate rental income, you know, you might think of hotels, apartment buildings in larger centers where a lot of owners don't own their buildings they operate the business in, but they rent them. That's where the income approach shines. And using the wrench as example there, it's kind of like that little wee gear-headed wrench. You know, that's very good for one size of bolt at a time, or one size of nut at a time, and that's about it. It's a very, very fine approach, and that's similar to the income approach. And now the actual theory of the income approach is basically what is the anticipated future benefits and what's that present worth of them. But simply put, how much money will I get over this time, and how much is that worth to me? And so what we do is, in areas that we're using this, we start by requesting from the property owners income and expense information on the building. And we use that to determine typical market rents and expenses. And we only require property rental income and expenses, not the owner's personal income. And of utmost importance is all this information is kept confidential and used only for assessment purposes. We've recently had some board of revisions that have ordered us to release information we had on hand, and we'll do that with asking for the board of revision to issue a confidentiality order to ensure that the information doesn't get spread around. So after we have the typical rents, then we determine something called the potential gross income. And what that looks for is if it was fully rented out, all the space was fully rented out, whether it be a retail space or an apartment building, or in this case, like a motel or hotel, what's the maximum potential rent that they could get in a yearly basis? Then we adjust for, in apartments, both vacancy and collection losses. And in the accommodations, it's a little bit different. It's just we look at what their occupancy rate is, and general commercial, again, vacancy and collection losses. So it accounts for that maybe it's not rented out all the time. And then we get down to the step of, we take that potential gross income, the vacancy and collection losses, effective gross income, and we end up minus the expenses, and we get down to net operating income. And we use that, the net operating income, to build a relationship to the selling price. Now, in looking at expenses, we've got expenses that we will use and then expenses that we don't use. And the ones that we don't use, essentially, they relate to the return of the investment. So that's the mortgage payments, capital improvements, depreciation, and income taxes is another expense that's not related directly to the property, because a lot of things affect an individual's income taxes. And as I said before, we're not interested in the individual or the corporation's income taxes. Now, the final step in applying the income approach is you're going to come up with a ratio. It's either, if it's something that if you divide the selling price by the income, you get a multiplier. And if you take the income divided by the selling price, you think of that, you're going to get a percentage or a capitalization rate. And with that, you're just looking at the relationship. What's the relationship between the selling price and the income? And so if you take the rental income and divide it by the cap rate, or rent, you get a value. If you've developed a multiplier and you take the rental income and multiply it by that multiplier, you'll get the property's value. So, as Sean talked about, one requirement of mass appraisal is there has to be statistical testing. And so there's two parts that we do. The first part is looking at the level of the values and getting an assessment to sales ratio at or near 1. And the second part is we want to also see how closely grouped to 1 are those individual ratios. And that's called the coefficient of dispersion. And it's simply a percentage. Smaller the percentage, the tighter the grouping is of the sales. Bigger percentage, you get in a bigger, the sales have more variation in them. Now, in some appeals, there's been a lot of focus on that COD. And some agents will point to, well, the International Association of Assessing Officers recommends it has to be at this ratio or below. Well, one thing with the IAAO's ratios is we've got a letter from the author of of that study that points out what they use as terms for large jurisdictions, there's no area in the province of Saskatchewan that actually hits their definition. So it's natural to say that because of our smaller size and smaller size sales sample, we're going to have higher levels of dispersion. The final thing that we do to help build validate the model is we take that model that we've built with the sales and we apply it back to each community. And we'll do this right during the analysis just to see what are the effects, and are there things that maybe we didn't have sales occur to estimate values on all property types. So do we have to look for other ways of valuing certain properties? And I think there's one more slide there. Your question, yeah. And you have to go back a few slides to remember when I talked about that. Here we go. There's true and false, and false is the most correct answer, because of course, if the Court of Appeal decision is very directive, we will have to rebuild models between cycles, and we also always take a look at those as we build up the next revaluation cycles models. So with that, I will turn it over to Sean.
All right, thank you, Kevin. If we're going to switch over now to talk about the outcome of the revaluation, we talked about the setup, the rules. Kevin talked about the enormous amount of work that we do and the approaches that we apply to come up with values. So now we've got the results for the province, and we're going to look at SAMA's assessments, and we've combined them with the city of Saskatoon, Regina, Prince Albert, and Swift Current to give you a kind of a sneak peek of the total impact for this revaluation in terms of updating. So we're looking at, of course, the economic update of the 2017 to 21 revals and the two respective base dates. So the difference between the Jan 1, 2019 base date and the Jan 1, 2015 base date to create an assessment trend. And we're doing that for every single observation in our database, and that would be all property. And assessment trends are also going to contain physical changes that occurred between those two revaluations. So anything that happened through maintenance, through inspections, is going to be part and parcel of the new assessment. The thing to remember is we're looking at provincial trends with the independent cities, and we're looking at 3 levels of trending. So today we're looking at provincial trends, and you get a sense of what's happening for certain types of property. It's really important to always remember that there's trends occurring at local levels, areas within the province, different municipalities, whether it's an urban, rural municipality, regular urban and resort, and then also right at the property level, so between neighborhoods and properties themselves. So when you look at these large high-level trends, it's pretty hard to extrapolate it to the property level, but it gives you a general sense of what's going in terms of change. So here we have the 100% assessed value for the entire province was 250 billion. For the last reval, it's 265 billion. So an increase of 1.06 times overall for the province. And that's a pretty good benchmark in terms of what's changing. By way of example, for previous revals, we'll look at much larger increases. So it was a fairly subtle increase for this latest update. And then when you look at the taxable and you apply provincial tax policy, and we have some exemptions on our database, it changes a bit more, and the multiple actually is very close to 1 or 0.99. So not a lot of change in terms of the taxable assessment between 2017 and 2021. So what we can do is go into this database and break it out by the 8 tax classes in legislation. And so we've got a bar chart here that shows you residential, seasonal, multifamily, arable and non-arable pasture land, commercial, linear property, railway and pipeline, and grain elevators. And there you see the total I mentioned in blue, 1.06 times. The thing you'll notice is most of the market property is staying very close to 1, not a lot of change. And the balance of property, although it's going up more than 1, it's not that profound compared to previous revaluations. So that's 100% percent value. Of course, we have tax policy, and for the 21 revaluation, we had a bit of a change, and that occurred for commercial, industrial, elevator, and railway and pipeline property. They were previously at 100% of value. For the 2021 reval value, they're at 85%. And so that is going to change and perhaps shift the taxable a bit. And you'll see it here. On the previous slide, you noticed the commercial, railway, and elevators were well above 1, and now they're falling in line in terms of tax incidence with most of the other property except for agricultural land, which is going up by a bit more. So that's one impact to be aware of. We can also use our database to kind of look at a more finite break on the property. And so we can break out commercial and take out the oil and gas and the mines and separate linear between railway and pipeline. And again, you see pretty stable values across the board for all types of property. We're not seeing things like we did for the previous revals. And I'll give you a look at what's happened in the past. So just going back one reval to the 2017, we presented it, the province was going up 38%. So a very large increase in assessment compared to what we have now with 1.06. And you can really see the difference here. We've got arable and non-arable land doubled in value. And then large increases like multifamily went up 40% and some other large ones in terms of regulated too. Now this one is kind of a psychedelic graph. You don't have to worry about spying all the details. Just look at the colors and you can see the current revaluation is in green. The 2017 revaluation is in blue, and the oldest revaluation, 2013, is in orange. Take a look at the left-hand side of the graph and you can see what happened to market properties. Residential, seasonal, multifamily, and arable and non-arable land doubled in value. So we're really seeing a mitigation of values for the 21 reval. The only other thing I would note is regulated property went up a fair bit. Like you could have increases between 20, 30% compounded over 3 revaluations. So in the end, I think, values have probably kept step fairly evenly across the board. But you can see the reason for a revaluation. Typically, you're looking at fairly significant changes. Maybe because it's not changing quite as much, this revaluation, it would be a little advantageous, especially with COVID having occurred after the base date. This is just a very quick look at the clusters, and what those are municipality groupings on our database. And we can break out urban municipalities between cities, large towns, medium towns, small towns, villages, and hamlets. They're in green. Bedroom communities are in blue, ranging from strong to the weaker groupings. We have resorts, and we have our very mid to large, separated from the small in yellow. And in orange, we have RM and strong, moderate, weak, and no influence. So all the different spectrums of municipality types and very, very stable values for residential across all the different types, and actually a decrease for the total. And that's for SAMA. So that gives you a good sense of what's happening in very stable values. This is residential trends on a GIS map, just to show you everything that is increasing is between, let's say, 10%. Very modest change is in yellow and green, so plus or minus on what is typical for the change. And you can see the map is pretty well colored. There's some exceptions. Some communities are going up or down by different amounts, but by and large, pretty stable values on an overall municipal level for residential. Now, the question always comes up, well, what's happened after the base date? The base date was January 1, 2019. Sales keep happening. And where do we sit right now? Residential sales, we don't have an up-to-date graph on this, unfortunately, but we did do some statistics. And when we're looking at the more current sales in this circled area after the base date to the right of the scatter plot, values will actually increase up towards the base date again if we were to graph it again, and we'll work on that, getting that. But it's telling us that values haven't dropped significantly since the base date on an overall basis. And we're looking at a quarter's worth of sales and the median for each quarter of all the sales in our data bank. So that means that residential values after the base date have stayed relatively stable. And if you listen to the news in certain areas, market values are going up on residential. Here's our arable land sales, and we had an increase of to arable land of 1.25, and we can see here the values continue to go up after the base date. So we're seeing our own market evidence and also from other authorities that track ag land sales, values are not going down. So they're actually doing fairly well in spite of COVID for ag land sales. And then just a couple quick GIS visuals to show you a city. This is the city of Yorkton, I believe. Sorry, Weyburn first. And you can see the trends. This municipality, the residential median is 7.9. So everything that's plus or minus 10% is in yellow. And you can see a lot of stability across the residential sector, a few going up and down by differing amounts, but most of it is in that yellow, that median range. The other areas in commercial are not colored, but you can see the residential here. This is the Yorkton one, and again, very similar results. Yorkton has a residential median of 0.88, and you can see everything again is pretty much plus or minus in the yellow. So again, a lot of stability, and maybe that's the theme of this revaluation. There hasn't been wholesale changes in our property values. Just to close off, what about the quality? You've got your 2021 assessments. You've looked them over and you're seeing what's on the roll. Leading up to the work that we do and the delivery of assessments that Kevin's group does in assessment services, there's a lot of work that goes in over the 4 years. We have statutory committees, including the City Assessor SAMA committee. So we're meeting between SAMA and the cities that do their own assessments to discuss revaluation issues and how to handle them. We have a provincial revaluation team of market analysts. Kevin spoke of our revaluation unit. These folks get together with their counterparts from the city, and they talk about the best ways to value property and some of the challenges and how to overcome them. We also have quarterly reporting on the 2021 revaluation, and we do this every reval to keep our board and the ministry apprised of any risks for the reval. How are we making out? Are any jurisdictions struggling with their computer systems or with challenges like that? And it's kind of like a health check on the reval, and that is a reoccurring report, and we're going to be finalizing that at the end of this quarter here. Q1 2021. We also do a provincial quality coordination project and audit. And again, that informs the quarterly report. Are there any issues emerging? We'll do a final closeout report and maybe some lessons learned on the reval. In closing, a couple high level statutory type. We've got one, the order for the quality assurance standard, a statutory quality test, and we spoke of that. That's the high level 9.5 to 1.05 ratio posted to SAMA's website, and the primary audit for role confirmations that you'd be familiar with. So a lot of checks and balances at a high level, in addition to all the work that assessment services does. The last slide I have for this section is talking about some of the risks. Every revaluation seems to have some kind of a risk, and we got hit with a big one, and that was COVID. So the pandemic hit, and it was after the January 1, 2019 base date, almost a year ago, and really shocked world markets, and including real estate markets. And so we saw a lot of duress in the in the regulated areas with oil and gas and the price of oil falling to $20. It's now recovered a bit, thankfully. Huge impact on industry. And then certain sectors, Kevin talked about the income approach and measuring potential income and rents and vacancies. And so the accommodation sector is one example where right across North America and the world got hit really hard. Thankfully, with the vaccine and some of the things that are happening, values are recovering. We did not have huge value increases after the base date, but values kind of stayed stable on an overall basis, so that is good. And then we had the percentages of value change on the commercial type going from 100 to 85% to mitigate some of that, the impact to those sectors. A couple other things, high level of appeals. We now have, I think we're up to 16 Court of Appeal cases. So there's some pretty high stakes precedent setting appeals that need to be heard and decided. And there is more or less a backlog occurring. So we've got a lot of cases in the queue, and it's becoming very litigious where you need solicitors involved, and it can be very expensive to take one of these appeals forward. Some of our own metrics is showing it can take a fair bit of time to go from a board of revision. If it goes through the SMB and to the Court of Appeal, it can take, over a year for sure, and in some cases up to 1,000 days to hear one of these appeals. And in 2017, there is a possibility every reval we get a bump up in appeals, and Kevin would know better. This is in his area, and I don't think 2021 will be any different, that we'll get off the hook. But we're building in that expectation that the first year of a reval cycle, as we come out with new values, we could get some additional challenges on appeals. All right, and with that, concludes this section. And I do have only one question. You guys get off easy here, so we'll see if we can get the question put up here. The 2017 to 2021 assessed values are increasing on an overall basis by, and you can pick your best pick there, 96106, 1.24, or 1.38. And we'll see what the group says. I think I went easy on you guys this time. You got her. Good job. Yes, 74% when it said 1.06 times. That's the overall provincial assessed value increase. So good job with that. And I'll turn it over to Kevin.
There, thanks, Sean. And we're almost done here. So just gotta find the screen to share here again. There we go. Now, so what's remaining? So as of Monday, we delivered to 635 of our clients, and steadily sending more packages out each day. And those packages, of course, are available in your MySAMA account. And you'll get a notice of where to go in there and download the files. And then as soon as we receive notice that your roll is being opened, either directly from your office or through the Gazette, we will take and we'll publish the 2021 values to SamaView, a service of MySAMA. And once they're published in there, then last year's, the 2020 values are also there for property owners to look at. And individual property owners can view general overview of unlimited number of properties. And each revaluation cycle, we add 25 credits to each MySAMA account for individual users. We add 25 free credits to their account. And so if they didn't use all their credits from the last revaluation cycle, they'll get another 25. If we've got situations where an individual owns more than 25 properties, once they provide the proof of that, we'll increase their credits so that they can get a detailed property report on, or pardon me, their property report for each of their properties. And we hope that SamaView, as in the past, is a good mechanism for answering a lot of questions, because people can go there, they can compare their values to their neighbors and that such. As always, as in any year, and especially in a reval year, we're available to do open houses to meet with property owners in that fashion. Of course, in light of COVID, we do those virtually. And same thing for council meetings. We will go and we can explain what's going on to the council. And that's always available at any point in time. If any of your councils want to have a meeting with us, we're more than happy to come out and meet, or as I said, I guess now, meet virtually. And that's essentially what's coming down the pipe. And then we'll get into the supportive value after this poll question. There we go. Yeah, 25 get added each revaluation cycle. So thanks for that, Cassian. So on the supportive values, just give you an idea. Right now, we've got about 50% of the roles open in the province, and currently we're at about 10% of the phone calls that we received in 2017. And phone calls and emails are our typical methods of interacting with property owners after they first received their assessment notice. And if from there, it'll go to of course, to the formal appeal process where they'll put in their appeal notice. As soon as we receive a copy of that appeal notice, we'll reach out to the property owner or their agent to discuss their appeal with them. And if we find a lot of the individual property owner appeals, you know, typically those usually uncovers some physical error in the assessment record. We haven't been there in a few years or whatever, or maybe they removed something and they didn't tell the municipality that it was removed. And so in that case, we can do an agreement to adjust, which of course you'll be familiar with, that both yourselves and the appraiser and the property owner all sign on that agreement to make it a valid agreement. And once that agreement is signed, the appeal is then withdrawn. And which that means is they can't sign an agreement and then go to the next level of the Saskatchewan Municipal Board. But before an agreement can be done, there actually has to be an appeal launched, because at that point in time, that's the only way that a change, that the agency can be a part of a change to the assessed value, because of course the role has been opened. If there is no agreement or not a complete agreement, then it'll go to a board of revision, and both parties to the board file their evidence, make their arguments. The board will make that decision, and based on that decision, either party to the appeal can actually appeal to the Saskatchewan Municipal Board. But before we get to that, Cassian, I'll get you to bring up I believe, the final question on my part. And now, just because it said, I believe it's the final question, doesn't mean, you can stop listening. And agreements to adjust can be done without launching an appeal. That is false. There has to be an appeal notice before an agreement to adjust can be done. And so I guess, yeah, just be aware, if you thought you could do them without the actual notice of appeal, yeah, the legislation, it follows out, because when you do an agreement, it withdraws the appeal. So in order to withdraw it, it first has to be filed with the secretary. Final slide here. Beyond the board of revision, of course, there is the Saskatchewan Municipal Board. That's the final level of kind of a fact review. They have to stay within the evidence package of the board of revision and the record of the board of revision. It's only in cases where, if the board of revision decision is not complete, in that they can't follow why the board got to the decision they made, at that point in time, the Saskatchewan Municipal Board does have the authority for basically rehearing the case. Or in the odd instance where there's some appeals that can go directly to the Saskatchewan Municipal Board, and at that point in time, they're hearing all the evidence and making the decision. Now, if there's a question of law, it can go from the decision of the municipal board, that can go to the Court of Appeal. Now, as Sean indicated, we've got a record number of appeals going to the Court of Appeal right now. And at a certain point in time, they were kind of widening what they were taking. Justices were allowing leave to. Just recently, it seems they might be narrowing it back down to just more focused on questions of law. And I don't have it on this slide. Of course, any Court of Appeal decision the individuals would have a right to take it to the Supreme Court of Canada. And there hasn't been a case, I believe, in the province for assessment related items. However, that said, there may be a case coming from the city of Saskatoon where they're going to apply for leave to the Supreme Court. So, and with that, I think we're available for the questions. And I'll see here if I can.
Kevin, there's one question. I don't know if you can see it in there.
Okay, yes, I can. So question is, the North Balfour region is so far behind. We only received our reval numbers last week, and some municipalities haven't received anything yet. If they cannot find ways to improve their efficiency, this could put us into a non-compliant situation. Yes, I apologize for that, and we started actually bringing other resources into the region to assist them about 3 weeks ago when we recognized where they were, that they were having troubles getting some of the values out. What I can say is in the last 2 weeks, I think they've moved up to almost having over half their municipalities they service with numbers sent out. So yeah, we're going to take our lessons learned from this reval and again make improvements, or try to make sure we're going to have improvements made for the next reval. And actually it'll come sooner than that, because we'll want to make sure that even for next year's maintenance that we're meeting client expectations. And I don't see any other questions coming in.
We appreciate everyone's time here today. It looks like we have another question. We're getting to the end.
Sure. I'll let you handle that question there, Sean.
Alrighty, so the question says, I'm curious why there was a little consultation or information about the decision to change the percentages of value for commercial and industrial. Was this a government decision? Yes, this is not a decision that SAMA makes. This is the Ministry of Government Relations. I do know that they do a fair bit of consultation. So early in the year, they're meeting with stakeholder groups. They're looking at the impacts of various decisions. And in the end, it is ultimately a government decision. So we're not directly involved, but close enough to know that a fair bit of consultation goes into those final decisions that are made by cabinet. And yes, this will have a huge impact to municipalities. Yes, I guess it depends where you are and how much the composition of your properties and so forth. But yeah, that is certainly something you can discuss with government relations, and I know that they've done all of the modeling and consultations to make this decision. I would suspect that COVID is a factor, is a part of this, and some of the industry hardship and wanting to keep some kind of stability between the revals and also post-COVID, but they'd be the best ones to address that too. Good question though. Well, we're waiting for any final questions. I just want to thank everyone for your time here today, for your attention, for your work on those quizzes. I think Corinne, did you get a final scoring? I think we were going to try to see how the group did overall.
This is Peter, Sean. The group got 8 out of 10 as a group, so pretty good work.
Wow. And it's only 50% to pass, so you guys did excellent. I think that was great. All right.
Now, I could take the next question here is, we've seen our elevator assessment numbers double. Is this everywhere across the province? And I would say no, only for some of the smaller that used to be crib elevators that were used not for farm purposes but commercial purposes. I think it is some of the ones that did see an increase, other than if there was I guess if there was an error, but without knowing the actual particular property, I can't comment on it, I guess, specifically.
I think it's safe to say that elevators have not doubled across the province. So Kevin's right, it's specific to unique locations and circumstances went into that. Well, we're approaching the end of the session. I think we're scheduled to around 3 o'clock. Are there any final questions from the group? We'd be happy to answer them if we can. Going once. Oh, there we go.
Our elevator assessment also doubled. Is it because it's a seed clean plant also? Yeah, that style of grain handling facility, the sales that we had through for this revaluation cycle had indicated that the values we had them at before, either we were under on before or their markets have increased. And we've got the next question. Ratepayer called to say the assessed building was demolished 10 years ago. Must he appeal to adjust or just adjust locally? If I'm not entirely certain of the exact cutoff point on legislation as to when you can do just a local assessor change and submit that as like issue a new assessment notice for that. But if they did appeal it, yeah, if it's demolished, then we'll take it off the assessment record. Well, I'll go for the final call of questions then. Okay, seeing none, I'll turn it over to Sean to close things off here.
Right. Well, thank you very much. Thanks, Kevin, for your sections, and hopefully we're able to answer some questions of the revaluation. And if you have any follow-up questions at any time, you can contact myself or Kevin. There's a lot of valuable resources on SAMA's website. Kevin mentioned SAMAview. There's My SAMA for administrators, and also the website has all of the orders, all the publications as well. And if you have any questions, of course, you can contact us. I believe the session is being recorded, so we'll see if we can have access to this. I know our last session from last year is on YouTube. And Kevin and I were joking, we had, I think, 82 hits as of a couple of weeks ago. And we're getting tired of watching it that many times. That's a lot of viewing.
That's right.
So anyways, I think this will be made available for the future. And thank you for your patience and your time here today. Everyone take care and stay safe.